Las Vegas, August 20th, 1973. Security guards caught a 12-year-old boy sneaking into Elvis's sold-out concert through a backstage door. The boy had run away from an orphanage 300 miles away just to see Elvis perform. What Elvis did when they brought the boy to him became one of the most beautiful examples of how one act of kindness can change the entire trajectory of a life. Subscribe to Elvis Presley Legacy Stories. For moments when the King showed us that everyone deserves a second chance and a reason to hope. The security guard who caught him was named Frank Morrison, a former Marine who had worked at the International Hotel for 5 years. He had seen every kind of trouble: drunk fans, aggressive autograph seekers, even a few attempted break-ins. But he had never encountered anything quite like this. The boy was small for his age, dirty, wearing clothes that were too big and held up with a rope belt. He had managed to slip through a service entrance that was supposed to be locked, navigating through corridors until he reached the backstage area. He was trying to peek through a curtain to see the stage when Frank spotted him. "Hey kid, you can't be back here," Frank said, grabbing the boy's shoulder. The boy didn't try to run. He just looked up at Frank with the most defeated expression the security guard had ever seen. "I know, I'm sorry, I just wanted to hear him sing." But what Frank didn't know yet was, this wasn't just a kid sneaking into a concert. This was a child making a desperate bid for something worth living for. Meet David Martinez. The boy's name was David Martinez, and he was 12 years old. He had been living at St. Joseph's Home for Boys in Flagstaff, Arizona, since he was 6, when his mother died of cancer and no relatives could be found to take him. Life at St. Joseph's wasn't abusive, but it wasn't warm either. It was institutional. 3 meals a day, clean clothes, adequate education, but no love, no individual attention, no sense of being special or wanted. David was one of 43 boys living there, and he felt invisible most of the time. The one thing that made David feel something was Elvis's music. An older boy at the home had a small radio, and sometimes they were allowed to listen to it. Whenever an Elvis song came on, David would stop whatever he was doing and just listen, feeling like the music was speaking directly to him about loneliness, hope, and the possibility of a different life. Wait until you see what happened next. 3 weeks earlier, David had learned that Elvis would be performing in Las Vegas in August. An idea began forming in his mind. A crazy, impossible idea. What if he could get there? What if he could see Elvis perform just once? What if, for just one night, he could experience something that made him feel like his life mattered? David started planning his escape. He saved food from meals. He stole a small amount of money from the donation box in the chapel, just enough for a bus ticket. He studied maps in the library, and on August 18th, during the afternoon recreation period, he climbed the fence and ran. The bus ride from Flagstaff to Las Vegas took 12 hours. David spent those hours imagining what it would be like to see Elvis in person, to hear that voice live, to be in the same room with someone who made him feel less alone. You haven't seen the biggest surprise yet. Frank Morrison brought David to the security office backstage. "What's your name, kid?" "David." "David what?" "Just David." "Where are your parents?" "Dead." "Who are you with?" "Who brought you here?" "Nobody, I came by myself." Frank studied the boy, the dirty clothes, the exhaustion, the desperation in his eyes. This wasn't a typical case of a kid sneaking into a concert. Something else was going on. "David, where did you come from?" "Flagstaff. That's 300 miles away. How did you get here?" "Bus." "Who paid for your ticket?" David was quiet. "Did you steal money, David?" The boy nodded, tears starting to form. "From the donation box at the orphanage. $5. I know it was wrong. You can call the police. Don't miss this crucial detail." Frank Morrison sat back in his chair, processing this. The kid had run away from an orphanage, stolen money, traveled 300 miles alone, all to sneak into an Elvis concert. That level of determination and desperation suggested something more than just being a fan. "Why did you risk all this just to hear Elvis sing?" David's answer came out in a whisper. "Because his music makes me feel like I'm not alone. Like maybe there's something better waiting somewhere. Like maybe I matter." Frank felt something crack in his chest. He had been ready to call the police and have the kid sent back to wherever he came from. But now, he wasn't sure what to do. The concert had already started. Frank could hear Elvis singing CC Rider to the roaring crowd. David could hear it too, and tears were streaming down his face, so close to what he'd come for, yet about to be sent away. What you're about to witness will blow your mind. Frank Morrison made a decision that went against protocol. "Wait here," he told David. Then he went to find Joe Esposito, Elvis's road manager. "Joe, I need you to talk to Elvis about something during the next break." "Frank, Elvis is in the middle of a show." "I know, but there's a kid back here who ran away from an orphanage and traveled 300 miles just to hear Elvis sing. I think Elvis would want to know about this before we call the police." Joe looked at Frank for a long moment, then nodded. "Give me 10 minutes. Think about this. If you caught someone breaking rules to pursue something that gave them hope, Would you follow protocol and punish them? Or would you look deeper to understand what drove them to such desperation? That's when the real magic began. During the break between songs, Joe whispered the situation to Elvis. Elvis's face went through several expressions: surprise, concern, and finally, determination. Bring him to me, right now. Joe fetched David from the security office. The boy looked terrified, expecting to be yelled at or arrested. Instead, he was brought to Elvis's dressing room where the king of rock and roll was sitting, still wearing his stage jumpsuit, drinking water and catching his breath. Elvis looked at David, really looked at him. He saw the dirty clothes, the exhaustion, the fear mixed with desperate hope. David, is it? The boy nodded, unable to speak. I hear you came a long way to see my show. Yes, sir. I'm sorry I snuck in. I know it was wrong. Where did you come from? St. Joseph's Home for Boys in Flagstaff. It's an orphanage. Elvis was quiet for a moment. You ran away from the orphanage to see me perform? Yes, sir. I took $5 from the donation box for the bus ticket. I'll pay it back somehow. Hold on. This story has an incredible continuation. Why was it so important to you to see me perform? David struggled to find words. Your music. When I hear it, I feel like I'm not alone. Like maybe my life could be different someday. Like maybe I matter to someone. Elvis felt tears starting in his own eyes. David, you do matter. You matter so much that you traveled 300 miles and risked everything just to hear music that makes you feel less alone. That takes courage. They're going to send me back and probably punish me, David said. But it was worth it. Even if I don't get to see the show, at least I got to meet you. At least I tried. Elvis stood up. Who said you're not going to see the show? You need to know this incredible detail. Elvis called Frank Morrison back in. Frank, David is going to watch the rest of the show, from the wings, right next to the stage. Can you arrange that? Of course, Elvis. And Frank, after the show I want to talk to David more. Don't call the orphanage yet. Let's figure out what's best for this young man before we make any calls. Elvis turned back to David. Come on, kid. Let's go watch a show. For the next 90 minutes, David Martinez stood in the wings of the stage at the International Hotel, watching Elvis Presley perform from 15 feet away. He saw the sweat, the effort, the artistry up close. He heard every note before it reached the microphone. He watched 2,000 people lose their minds while he had the best seat in the house. Between songs, Elvis would glance over at David and smile, sometimes winking, making sure the boy knew he wasn't forgotten. During Can't Help Falling in Love, Elvis sang directly to David for one verse, and the boy felt like his heart would burst. At the end of the show, Elvis did something unprecedented. He called David out onto the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to introduce you to someone special. This young man traveled 300 miles just to hear me sing tonight. His name is David Martinez, and he reminds me that music isn't just entertainment. It's hope. It's connection. It's what keeps us going when everything else fails. The audience gave David a standing ovation. The boy stood there in his dirty clothes, overwhelmed, experiencing for the first time in his life what it felt like to be seen, acknowledged, celebrated. But the most touching moment was still to come. After the show, Elvis took David to his dressing room for a real conversation. He ordered food for David, who hadn't eaten properly in 2 days. While David ate, Elvis asked questions and really listened to the answers. David talked about his mother, who had died when he was 6, about living at the orphanage, feeling invisible and unwanted, about how every potential adoptive family had looked at him and chosen someone else, younger, cuter, less damaged, about how he was starting to believe he was unlovable. The only time I don't feel like that is when I hear your music, David said. It makes me feel like there's something out there for me, like maybe I won't be alone forever. Elvis was crying openly now. David, I'm going to tell you something. You're not unlovable. You're not damaged. You're a brave, determined young man who took an enormous risk because you needed hope. That makes you extraordinary. Wait until you hear what happened after. I'm going to make some calls, Elvis said. I'm going to talk to the people at your orphanage, and I'm going to make sure you get what you need, not just food and shelter, but real care, real attention, real opportunities. Why would you do that for me? David asked. You don't know me. Because I know what it's like to feel alone, Elvis replied, and because nobody should go through life feeling invisible, especially not a kid with as much courage as you. Elvis kept his word. That night, he called St. Joseph's Home for Boys and spoke with the director, Father Thomas O'Brien. Instead of simply returning David, Elvis negotiated something different. He agreed to fund a full-time counselor position at the orphanage, specifically to work with children who were struggling emotionally. He also agreed to fund enrichment programs, music lessons, sports activities, field trips, things that would help the children feel special and valued. In exchange, Father O'Brien agreed to give David individualized attention, to work on finding him a proper placement with a family, and to ensure he wasn't punished for running away. "That boy didn't run away because he's bad," Elvis told the director. "He ran away because he was desperate for hope. You need to figure out how to give him that at Sands, Joseph's, or help him find it somewhere else." Incredible revelation coming up. But Elvis didn't stop there. Over the next year, he stayed in contact with David. He called every few weeks to check on him. He sent cards and letters. He arranged for David to attend 2 more concerts, this time as an official guest with proper tickets and VIP treatment. Most importantly, Elvis used his connections to help Father O'Brien find David a foster family, a couple in Phoenix who had grown children and wanted to provide a home for an older child who needed extra support. David moved in with John and Martha Richardson in November 1973, 3 months after sneaking into that concert. For the first time in 6 years, David had a real home. The transformation in David over the next few years was remarkable. With the love and stability provided by the Richardsons, with regular therapy funded by Elvis, and with the confidence gained from knowing that someone as important as Elvis believed in him, David began to thrive. He excelled in school. He joined the choir, discovering he had a good singing voice. He made friends. He smiled more. He started believing he had a future. Elvis continued to be part of David's life. He attended David's 8th grade graduation in 1975, surprising everyone at the ceremony. He sent David a guitar for his 15th birthday with a note. "For the young man who taught me that courage means taking risks for hope. Keep singing, David." When Elvis died in 1977, David was devastated. He was 14 years old, and he felt like he had lost the person who had saved his life. If someone believed in you at your lowest moment and gave you a reason to hope, how would losing them affect you? Would their influence continue to guide you even after they were gone? David Martinez graduated high school in 1979 with honors. He attended Arizona State University on a scholarship, studying social work because he wanted to help other children who felt invisible and unwanted, just like he once had. After graduation, David returned to St. Joseph's Home for Boys, not as a resident, but as a counselor. He worked there for 35 years, helping hundreds of children who were struggling with the same feelings of abandonment and invisibility he had experienced. "Elvis saved my life twice," David told people throughout his career. "First, by not having me arrested when I snuck into his concert. Second, by showing me that my life had value, that I mattered, that someone believed in me. I'm just passing that gift forward to other kids who need to hear it." David also established a program at St. Joseph's called the Elvis Presley Second Chance Initiative, which provided resources for children dealing with emotional trauma. The program included music therapy, individual counseling, and enrichment activities, all things Elvis had funded after meeting David. Wait until you hear what happened after. The story of Elvis and David inspired changes at orphanages and children's homes across the country. The recognition that children in institutional care needed more than just food and shelter. They needed individual attention, enrichment activities, and reasons to hope led to new approaches in child welfare. Several organizations began implementing second chance policies for children who ran away or acted out, recognizing these behaviors as cries for help rather than simply disciplinary problems. The story was used in social work training programs as an example of looking beyond behavior to understand underlying needs. Frank Morrison, the security guard who had initially caught David, was so moved by Elvis's response that he began volunteering at children's homes in Las Vegas. "Elvis showed me that sometimes breaking the rules is a sign of desperation, not defiance," Frank said. "I learned to look deeper." David Martinez is now 63 years old and recently retired from his career in social work. He and his wife Susan, also a social worker, raised 3 children, all of whom work in helping professions inspired by their father's story. David still has the guitar Elvis gave him, now displayed in his home office alongside photos from that night in 1973. He occasionally speaks at conferences about child welfare, always telling the story of how Elvis saved his life by choosing to see him rather than punish him. "People ask me what Elvis was really like," David says. "I tell them he was someone who understood that everyone has a story, that behavior is often a symptom of deeper pain, and that sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply see someone who feels invisible." David visits Elvis's grave at Graceland every August 20th, the anniversary of the night that changed his life. He brings flowers and tells Elvis, though he's gone, about the children he's helped, the lives he's touched, the ripples that continue from that one night. What we can learn, the story of Elvis and David Martinez teaches us profound lessons about second chances, the importance of looking beyond surface behavior to understand deeper needs, and how one act of compassion can create ripples that extend for decades. First, it reminds us that rule breaking sometimes stems from desperation rather than defiance. David didn't sneak into that concert because he was bad. He did it because he was desperate for hope, for connection, for proof that his life had value. Second, it shows us that the way we respond to people at their lowest moments can change the trajectory of their entire lives. Elvis could have had David arrested and sent back to the orphanage with additional punishment. Instead, he saw a child in pain and chose to respond with compassion and support. Third, it demonstrates that influence and resources are most valuable when used to help the vulnerable. Elvis used his fame to get David proper care, his money to fund programs at the orphanage, and his time to maintain a relationship that gave David a reason to keep trying. How many children in our communities are acting out not from malice but from desperation, for attention, for hope, for proof that they matter? What would happen if we responded to their behavior with curiosity and compassion rather than punishment and rejection? John and Martha Richardson, the couple who fostered David, initially had reservations about taking in a 12-year-old who had run away and stolen money. But after meeting Elvis personally and hearing David's full story, they understood they weren't just fostering a troubled child. They were giving a desperate boy the family he'd been searching for. Elvis called us personally to ask if we'd consider David, Martha Richardson recalled in a 2015 interview. He didn't pressure us or use his fame to influence our decision. He just told us David's story honestly and said he believed this boy deserved a chance at a real family. Then he asked if we could be that family. The Richardsons worked closely with Elvis during David's first year with them. Elvis would call to check on David's adjustment, offer advice on handling difficulties, and even visited their Phoenix home twice to spend time with David and show support for the family. Elvis taught us that fostering wasn't about fixing a broken child, John Richardson said. It was about seeing a whole person who had been wounded by circumstances and providing the love and stability they needed to heal. That perspective changed everything for us. The Richardsons went on to foster 6 more children after David, directly inspired by their experience with Elvis's compassionate approach. All 6 children thrived in their home, and several maintained close relationships with the family into adulthood. St. Joseph's Home for Boys underwent significant changes following Elvis's intervention. The counselor position Elvis funded became a model for other institutions, demonstrating the value of providing individualized emotional support rather than just basic care. Father O'Brien, the director, implemented several reforms inspired by Elvis's perspective on what children needed. He established a music program, recognizing how powerfully music had affected David. He created a Big Brother mentorship system, pairing each boy with a volunteer mentor. He instituted regular one-on-one conversations between staff and residents to ensure no child felt invisible. Elvis showed us that institutional efficiency isn't enough, Father O'Brien said in a 1976 interview. These children need to feel seen, valued, and special. We restructured our entire approach based on what Elvis taught us through his response to David. The changes at St. Joseph's caught the attention of child welfare organizations nationwide. Other institutions sent representatives to study their model, and many implemented similar programs. The ripple effect of Elvis's intervention with one runaway boy influenced child welfare practices across the country. During his 35-year career as a social worker, David Martinez developed a specialized approach to working with children in institutional care, an approach he called the Elvis method. Though he always said Elvis would have hated the name, the core principles were simple but revolutionary. See the person, not just the behavior. Understand that acting out is often a cry for help. Provide reasons to hope, not just rules to follow. Create individual connections, not just group management. Celebrate small victories and recognize progress. David trained over 500 social workers in this approach through workshops and seminars. Follow-up studies showed that children in programs using these principles had significantly better outcomes, higher graduation rates, better emotional health, and more successful transitions to adulthood. David didn't just help individual children, said Dr. Rebecca Torres, who studied his methods. He changed how an entire generation of social workers approached their work with vulnerable children. His influence extends to thousands of children he never personally met. Every August 20th since 1973, David has observed what he calls Second Chance Day, the anniversary of the night Elvis gave him a second chance. He spends the day volunteering with at-risk youth, telling his story and encouraging young people who feel hopeless or invisible. In 1985, David formalized this into an annual event at St. Joseph's, inviting former residents to return and share their success stories with current residents. The event, now called the Elvis Presley Second Chance Celebration, has become a major fundraiser and awareness campaign for the orphanage. Hundreds of people attend each year, many of them adults who grew up at St. Joseph's and were influenced by the programs Elvis's intervention inspired. They come to celebrate their own second chances and to inspire the current generation of children that life can get better. That event is David's way of multiplying what Elvis did for him, said one former resident. Elvis gave David hope. David has spent his life giving hope to others. That's the legacy. Not just one life saved, but thousands influenced. The guitar Elvis gave David for his 15th birthday has become a powerful teaching tool. David brings it to schools, juvenile detention centers, and group homes, using it as a conversation starter to tell his story. When kids see this guitar and hear that Elvis Presley gave it to a runaway orphan, they pay attention, David explained. It opens their minds to the possibility that their circumstances don't define their destiny, that someone might see value in them even when they can't see it themselves. The guitar has been played by hundreds of at-risk youth during David's presentations. Many say that holding an instrument that connected them to both Elvis and David's story gave them hope that they too might have a story worth telling someday. In his will, David has arranged for the guitar to be donated to St. Joseph's Home for Boys after his death, to be displayed alongside the story of how one night changed everything, inspiring future generations of children who need reasons to hope. Frank Morrison, the security guard who caught David that night, said the incident fundamentally changed how he viewed his job and his responsibility to people in distress. Before that night, I would have just called the cops and felt good about catching someone breaking the rules, Frank admitted. Elvis showed me that sometimes the most important thing isn't enforcing rules. It's understanding why someone felt desperate enough to break them. Frank began volunteering with at-risk youth in Las Vegas, using his experience in security to teach young people about making better choices while also advocating for understanding rather than just punishment when they made mistakes. He established a program called Second Look that trained security personnel, police officers, and other first responders to recognize when rule breaking might be a symptom of deeper distress and to respond with appropriate resources rather than just punishment. David taught me that every person has a story, Frank said. Elvis taught me that our job is to understand that story before we judge the person. Those lessons changed my life. 50 years later, people still talk about the night Elvis found a runaway orphan sneaking into his concert and changed that boy's entire life trajectory. It wasn't Elvis's biggest show or most famous performance, but it was perhaps his most important intervention, a demonstration that true greatness means recognizing potential in people everyone else has overlooked or given up on. In a world that often punishes desperation and overlooks the vulnerable, this story reminds us that some rule-breaking deserves understanding rather than punishment, that every child deserves to feel valued and seen, that one person's belief can change the course of a life. David Martinez came to Las Vegas expecting to be arrested and sent back to an orphanage where he felt invisible. Instead, he found someone who saw him, valued him, and gave him reasons to believe his life mattered. That belief transformed him from a desperate runaway into a man who spent his life helping other desperate children find hope. That's why this story matters. It reminds us that we all have opportunities to choose compassion over judgment, to see people's pain rather than just their behavior, to use whatever influence we have to give someone a second chance and a reason to hope. That August night in 1973, Elvis Presley proved that being the king of rock and roll meant nothing compared to being the person who saw value in a child everyone else had overlooked. He showed us that the most important rules to follow aren't always the written ones, but the moral ones. That children deserve hope, that desperation deserves understanding, that everyone deserves to be seen and valued. David Martinez sneaked into a concert expecting to be punished. He left with a new life because Elvis understood that sometimes the greatest gift we can give is simply seeing someone who feels invisible and telling them they matter. If this story moved you, look around for people who are acting out from desperation rather than defiance, who need someone to see past their behavior to their pain. Be their Elvis. See them, value them, give them reasons to hope. Subscribe to Elvis Presley Legacy Stories to discover more moments when the King showed us that true power means lifting up the powerless, that real influence means changing lives, that genuine royalty means recognizing worth in everyone. Share this story with someone who works with vulnerable children or who needs to remember that everyone deserves a second chance, because that's what real kings do.